Thank you all for joining. I want to spend time today talking about RAG. And unlike a lot of other talks on RAG what I want to show you really is how we can treat RAG like any other managed service. Just like you don't train your own foundation models when you're working with vectors, you don't like try to set up your own vector infrastructure. You go to established pieces. And what I want to show you is how we can treat RAG like any other managed service. So what my plan today is, I'll give you a little bit of an overview on RAG, kind of what we're doing. We'll build an agent. I'm going to do a little bit of a deeper dive into RAG, talk about how we can combine RAG and some tools. Now, as we go through this, if you have questions, use the Q&A, right? The 9 little dots, go to the Q&A, ask questions throughout this. I realize not everybody wants to hear kind of about our RAG platform. So as part of this is I'll make sure I talk about a little bit about kind of why we care about RAG. What are some best practices around RAG? What are some use cases? I'll also leave time at the end for questions. So have your questions. You can send them through during the talk or kind of at the end, but I want to make sure everybody has a good understanding of RAG and how it's useful to you and how you might be using it in your own enterprises. Now, to start off with kind of why we're here and kind of what's going on, of course, is we're all excited about AI. Right? You're joining a whole day of seminars around agents, but we also see that a lot of people have trouble getting them into production, where we start with demos, they work out great, but as we try to scale them up, it doesn't work so well. Now, I've experienced this for several years. I was over at Hugging Face for a couple of years. I worked with the founders of Contextual, Aman and Dow there. At that point, I was stealing away their researchers to kind of use to help customers build use cases. They got tired of me stealing away their folks. And so they were like, well, let's just build a company kind of devoted to this. The first use case they really focused on is RAG, or Retrieval-Augmented Generation. And I hope most of you are kind of aware of this. It's probably the biggest and hottest use case you see out there in GenAI. And it's simply because it allows us to take advantage of all the knowledge, all the unstructured information that's sitting inside of places, take all that information, and then be able to ask questions, be able to use large language models that can generate very concise summaries or write long reports and extract and make valuable use of all of that knowledge. Now, hopefully most of you have experience and have some insight that, yeah, RAG works, it's helpful. I saw a recent research paper just this last week that did a study inside a company where it gave some people a RAG, a chatbot attached to a RAG, and some people didn't get that. And what they found is that the folks that had access to RAG, that had access to all the knowledge inside the company, being able to use that chatbot to answer questions, did significantly better in task performance. I think a lot of us intuitively know this, but it's always nice to see that kind of the research is showing as well that adding tools like RAG into your stack is going to help employee productivity. Now, as many of you kind of start building this together, it's very easy to build a RAG demo, but as you start to put together all the components, and we'll go through a lot of the components, you start seeing that, hey, wait a minute, this is a lot of stuff to manage, to maintain, to keep track of. And it goes everything from like, what is my chunking strategy? How am I going to tune my re-rankers? All of these pieces add a little bit. And it's fun and exciting the first time your team builds this. But what we find is teams get tired of having to do this as they move on to the next use case, are looking for something else to manage all of that. And so this is where our platform comes in to help manage those RAG use cases. And the approach here is we'll connect to all of the structured data that's out there, the unstructured data. The first step is a data understanding pipeline. And I'll show you this in more detail, but the idea is all the complex information you have. Think about if you have PDFs. Well, how are you going to get all that information out of the PDF, the tables, the images, so people can usefully search on them? And this is where you have to build an entire pipeline that analyzes the layout of documents, that does OCR, that if you have an image, maybe you apply a vision language model to understand it. If you have a table, We use a table model to do it. So you can see that there's a lot of complexity there that you have to do on that first step. But if you're building your own RAG solutions, it's an important part, because if your data isn't extracted cleanly, it's going to be hard to search for it. It's going to be hard to write responses based on it. So once we cleanly extract the data, then we go through a typical RAG pipeline. And I have deeper architectural diagrams as we go through this, but we follow the best practices that you should be doing as well. As when you're working with RAG, you want to use both a semantic search, get those concepts, get the things that are sneakers are related to tennis shoes. But you also want to use a traditional lexical search, the keyword, a word search, because often people know the exact wording that they want. So this is where we have a mixture of retrievers that you can use to kind of balance that out. The next step is we add a re-ranker. And what we and others have found is that a re-ranker is an extra step, but that step gets you a lot better performance, a lot better accuracy by being able to take the chunks that are most relevant to your question. Once we have those accurate chunks, we pass it over to a grounded language model. Some folks, you can use Gemini, ChatGPT. What we found is that by training a specific model to respect the context, respect the chunks that it was given, and not use its own judgment, we end up with responses that have lower hallucinations. Modern models are so smart that they know everything about the world. They'll often tell you that stuff, even if it isn't kind of what your information, what your evidence, your chunks have. And then finally, we'll take all of this, give you a lot of different outputs. We can talk about MCP, integrating with APIs as well. So that's a little bit of feel for kind of an overall RAG infrastructure. And I'm going to walk through kind of using this in an example where we have some financial data. We want to do question answers, maybe we want to do extraction, or as well as agentic workflows. Now, again, like as we're going through this, feel free to kind of ask questions. I want to make sure everybody walks away with an understanding of kind of how to build these systems as well. So I'm going to move over to kind of our platform. The way we think about RAG is that you have a lot of RAG use cases inside a company. And each of these boxes is another use case. Now, these use cases are defined by data stores, the data that RAG is connected to, as well as the prompts and the settings for that particular use case. You can see here we have some financial, some legal, some marketing along the way. So the first step for doing this is to go ahead and let's go to our data stores and ingest in some documents to be able to do it. So a data store here is a collection of documents. You'll see here I have lots of different documents inside of here that we've already processed. What you do is you just upload the documents, PowerPoint, HTML, Word docs, all those can come in here. Now the first step is you want to double check after you've uploaded that document. You want to, as a developer, make sure that that document information is coming in very cleanly. And so we've added a content inspector. And so if you're familiar with RAG, what we're doing here is we've taken the entire document, we've broken it up into chunks, but we've given you a chunk inspector so I can see, for example, for this particular page, we created a chunk, a portion of the document that we're going to use for searching here. And I can see exactly what information that we were able to extract out. If it's just text, it's pretty straightforward. Where the complexity comes in is where you have tables and images, because something like this, we have to use a separate model to be able to understand all that data inside there. What were all the different data points? What were they valued? Because then I'm able to make searches across all of this data. So this first step is a really important part, is that you want to make sure all your information is cleanly extracted. And if there's questions, I can talk about chunking strategies and different approaches we have like that. But that's the first step to kind of working on this. Now, I promised you that we would kind of let you kind of create an agent. So I'm going to go ahead and just create a new agent. I'm just going to give it an agent. What is this? MLOps webinar. And we're going to create a financial agent. Now, after I give it a name, I'm going to connect it to a data store. I can connect it to multiple data stores, but here, oh, I don't need to create a new one. I have one already. We're going to go ahead and create a data store, connect that up. And that's it. That's all I need to do to be able to kind of create it. And from here, I can ask kind of various questions. I can ask very specific factual questions. If I have multi-hop questions, our system will handle that. But I want to give people the notion of what's going on here is I'm asking a question. We're then retrieving a bunch of pieces of information that is relevant to the question. In this case, the model saw that really I only need one piece of information to actually answer this question. And it's answering the question and then showing me the user kind of where the information comes from. This is all kind of best practices, and what you want in a RAG solution is you want to show people that write the answer, but also allow people to understand where the information is coming from. There's also feedback mechanisms as well. So you can give thumbs up, thumbs down, flag pieces as well, because as you're building out a system, this is where user acceptance testing comes in. You want to make sure you collect the feedback from users because they often have a lot of knowledge in their head. They know where all the documents are. They know what the answers are. So when you first roll out a system like this, it's important to include this feedback because this is how you get your system to be better. Now, for those of you who've developed a lot of these, you're probably like, okay, well, that's easy, but how do I, where are the controls? Where are the knobs that I want to do? And we got plenty of knobs, whether you want to kind of mess with system prompts, reformulation, retrieval, re-rank, all of the things that you would expect as a developer to be able to modify in your RAG pipeline. We have, and plenty more like that. So this is a taste of kind of how we can do a query and understand what's going on. I want to point out that there's a lot of uses for this besides traditional question answer. So one other common use case we want to take advantage of RAG for is things like extraction, where I have lots of unstructured documents, but I just want to get useful pieces of information. Maybe I'm going to take those useful pieces of information and put them into another database. So in this case, I've used a different agent that I've already configured for extraction, and you can see here, I've asked a question, and it comes back in a nice JSON configuration. And normally I would use our APIs for this. I just wanted to show this into a demo. We have APIs that make it very easy to do this, but hopefully the light bulbs go off for how you can use a RAG system in many ways. And in fact, if we talk to our customers, that's exactly what they do. Is some of them will take our RAG system like Qualcomm and they integrate it in. So when you ask a question on the Qualcomm public website, it actually uses a contextual backend to be able to answer it. For others, they want to do that extraction portion that I talked about, where I'm a VC and I have lots of questions I want to be able to ask about a fund. Well, what I can do is I can write a macro that connects to that contextual API, ask those questions, and automatically fill in my spreadsheet with that information. Hopefully, I've shown you all the pieces here, so this isn't a surprise to put together. Now, because we're very good, and because RAG, when we think about context engineering, is very useful for getting out that important factual information, when we start talking about more agentic workflows like a lot of you are doing, RAG often becomes an important step inside a workflow. So this is a research workflow I have. Let me see, I don't know if it's zoomed in enough like this, but you can see part of it is you're going to have multiple tools in an agentic workflow, and RAG might be one of those tools. So you can use Contextual's APIs, you can use our MCP, but you can then use that RAG research as part of a tool. So when I do a query like, tell me about NVIDIA profitability for next year, it can do a combination of web search as well as RAG search to be able to identify what's the best way to be able to answer this. And this is kind of an agentic solution. Now here, I've used LangGraph along with some Google tools for doing the web search. But when we do the queries, it'll decide, should I use the RAG that's already in my financial database, or should I go out and do an internet search using internet search because it's something a little bit more recent like that. Now, this, of course, is a little bit of a deep research agent. It can take a little bit longer to do, but you can see here, we can provide all that different steps around tool selection, RAG research, even be able to kind of show you the sources that comes out here where I can go and see, oh, this is the document where it pulled out some of that information in solving it. So I promised that I would be able to answer questions. I wanted to keep kind of my talking part to about 20 minutes or so. I have a lot more material, so if people don't have questions, I'm going to show you off a lot more. As we go through this, if there's questions about how we do extraction, I could talk about how our extraction pipeline, some of the complexities around retrieval that we do in terms of dealing with metadata, dealing with filters to make sure we can get the most accurate information that comes through. We fine-tuned our own re-ranker. So an important part of a RAG process is using a re-ranker if you're really looking for accuracy. We've made it so you can add a prompt for an instruction. This instruction allows it to prioritize different types of chunks that way. And so this can be another useful tool when you're thinking about this. Finally, on the generation side, we have some pieces there in terms of things like roundness scores and attributions that I can talk about as well. And I want to end with MCP. I think a lot of you are looking at agents like that. We've also adopted MCP. It makes it available so you can use kind of our RAG from OpenAI. I have a demo with Cursor where you're looking for code. The code is inside of documentation that's sitting inside of Contextual. You can use Cursor, ask a query, and it pulls the code snippets out from Contextual like that. You can also use it, as we talked about earlier, in kind of more complex agentic workflows as well. So I think MCP is another exciting way to be able to connect to things as well. Now, everything I've done here, you can easily get started with this. So all of our stuff is consumption-based. We give you a credit for signing up. So there's no reason that you can't just go into our app, go ahead and try. We have plenty of good documentation, other webinars, other videos as well that dive deeper into this. All right, I'm going to take a break. I'm going to see kind of what questions you folks have. It doesn't have to be on our platform. You'll want to take advantage of all of you while we're here. So go ahead and get them typed in. I'm going to go ahead and take a look here and see what's coming in. Okay, I'm still waiting for that first question to come in. I'm hoping some of you kind of will ask some questions. In the meantime, let me go through some of the details in building a pipeline like this, some of the things that we've had to think about that if you were building your own extraction or parsing, you would have to think about as well. I talked a little bit about how we extract out information. This is a complex part. It's literally a kind of a system of models to do this. And this is something you have to think about if you're trying to do this on your own, where once that PDF document comes in that we want to analyze, we automatically add some metadata into it. Right? When are we doing this? Who is the one that sent it over? We also allow people to inject their own metadata. I think there's a lot of often questions about, hey, can I use graph RAG? What are some advanced retrieval techniques? The easiest way to get signal when you're working with RAG is to take advantage of metadata. By adding that, it'll make your retrieval process a lot more accurate like that. And you don't have to kind of switch to some other fancy technologies to take advantage of that. So I think that's one of my big recommendations for folks when they're thinking about how can I improve my performance. Now, as we do this, we use, you have to use image captioning. You have to go out and get a vision language model, a table model like that. We'll do a layout analysis where we look at the structure of the document. So knowing where headings are, subsections, like that kind of information can be useful when you're doing the retrieval. So things to think about as well. And we use that as well for kind of the chunking strategy when we divide a document up into little segments like that. So these are all things you can think about if you're working with folks that are extracting all of that information out. The next part that you have to think a little bit more deeply about in terms of RAG is how you build out your query pipeline. In the old days, the traditional RAG often was, hey, all you do is use an embedding model, you put it inside a vector database, and that's it. And that kind of RAG has quickly fallen out of favor. It's a very easy demo, but often to get the type of responses, to get the retrievals you need to have a few more steps in here. And so this is where, when we look at the queries, we'll do things like query reformulation. So if you're building your own, you have to think about how are you going to handle multi-turn. Maybe I want to take my query, expand it, because my users often use abbreviations, and I know that if I expand it, I'll get better results. Or on the other side of that, decomposition. So they're like cramming too much stuff. They ask about NVIDIA, Meta, and Apple all in the same query. If we decompose that into 3 individual queries, we're going to get better retrievals and better answer those questions. Well, once we have all that information, those queries, well, this query is only about NVIDIA. My data store includes all the different companies out there. Why don't I use some type of filter that just limits my retrievals to NVIDIA? Right. So using techniques, taking advantage of metadata like that, this can improve the quality of the chunks, the quality of the information you get. I've already talked a little bit about the re-ranker. We also have something called a filter model that helps kind of get rid of excess chunks that aren't necessary. But these are some of the things that, if you're building your own RAG pipelines, that you have to think about all these steps. And this is where, like, our goal is just to make life easier for end users by rolling all of that into kind of one application, so you don't have to think about it, and then giving you the switches, giving you the code if you want to be able to turn these things on and off as well. All right. I'm going to pause here and see if I can pull any questions out of all of you folks out there. Anything I'm missing? Anything you wanted me to talk about but I shouldn't have talked about like this? Thank you all. Again, I encourage you, if you have a little bit of time, check out our application. It's free to try out. If you use your work email, you'll get double the amount of free credits. So you can 2x it by using your work email instead of using like a Gmail like that. Once you go do it, you can see we've got everything well documented. We have some docs out there. I have lots of, we have a repo full of code example notebooks. So if you're somebody that wants to use APIs, hands-on getting started like that, you can have all these examples, so you can go ahead and just build your agent, create your agent, query it, all using our APIs. So hopefully there's no reason for you not to get started. If you run into any issues, please feel free to kind of drop me a line, ask me any questions as well. My contact info is there. But thank you all. I'll pause here until our time is done, but yes, this is it for everybody. Thanks.